Climate change is already a reality. Either more extended droughts and intense hurricanes lead to the destruction of infrastructure and the disruption of livelihoods. There is a substantial academic literature, both in economics and finance, that provides a broad evidence on the adverse effect of climate change, for example, on labor productivity. Rising temperature is recognized to cause lower productivity linked to the impact on cognitive function. There is also growing evidence on the adverse effects of climate change on firm performance. Policy action introduced to combat climate change might be equally disruptive for businesses, in particular for carbon-intensive firms. As such, it is necessary to better understand the exposure of businesses to climate change risks and their implication for the financial sector. Climate change affects the financial system through two main channels. The first channel involves physical risks arising from damage to property, infrastructure, all of them associated to the changes to the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. The second channel is the so-called transition channel or transition risk. This results from the change in climate policy, technology, and consumer and market sentiment during the adjustment to a lower carbon economy. Exposure to physical and transition risk can vary significantly from country to country and from one industry to another. It is also important to recognize that the two risks are interdependent. As the greater the degree of transition that takes place, the lower the physical risk and vice versa. For financial institutions, physical and transition risk can materialize directly through their exposure to corporations that experience climate change shocks and countries that undertake climate policies. Financial institutions are also exposed indirectly through the effects of climate change on the wider economy and feedback effects within the financial system. Physical exposures manifest themselves through increased default risk of loan portfolios or lower value of assets. For example, rising sea levels and the higher incidence of extreme weather events can diminish property values, leading to greater risk in real estate portfolios. Or they can also increase disruptions of companies' operations, leading to lower profitabilities of those companies or increasing the risk of bankruptcy. Transition risks materialize on the asset side of financial institution, which could incur losses on exposure to companies with businesses model that are more exposed to low carbon transition. Risks can also materialize through the economy at large, especially if the shift to a low carbon economy proves to be abrupt or poorly designed. Related to these two risks is now the concern about financial instability. It might be possible that asset prices will adjust rapidly to reflect unexpected realizations of transition or physical shocks. In fact, there is already some evidence in the academic literature that markets are only partly pricing in climate change risks. There is, in fact, evidence that the extent of potential damage and policy action required to limit global warming to 2 degrees not be fully reflected in current asset prices. Central banks and financial regulators increasingly acknowledge the financial stability implication of climate change. For example, the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system, also known as NGFS, is promoting the integration of climate-related risks into supervision and financial stability monitoring. In the United Kingdom, prudential regulators are currently discussing the incorporation of climate change scenario into stress testing of the financial institution that cover both physical and transition risk. So that takes us to the question of this workshop, climate risk assessment. So there are 3 key components to consider. First, we need to identify the climate hazard of the climate policy under investigation. We need to understand the asset exposure to climate hazard or exposure to climate policy. And last key consideration is the asset vulnerability to the climate hazard or climate policy. Together with Lincoln Pension, we've been developing a general framework to ensure proper identification and analysis of the transmission channels that translate climate risk into financial risk. For example, we've been looking at macroeconomic channels, supply chain channel, operational channel. This is a novel framework that can be applied to the needs of all financial institutions for investment in different sectors and geography. Financial institutions can use this framework not only for carrying out climate risk assessment, but also as a guidance on the different stages of risk decision making. First, the detailed analysis of a different transmission channel help identifying concretely how climate hazard and climate policy may generate impact on portfolio. Second, the proposed framework can be used to build capacity for risk analysis. By looking at each step of the analytical process, a detailed analysis of a different transmission channel can help understand which specific data and tools should be used.